What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G and the TCL Stylus 5G. Now, in case you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about each of them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the TCL Stylus 5G, we're getting a 6.81-inch IPS LCD display. This phone also has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 395, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So both phones do have really good displays, and if you're going to be doing lots of stuff like watching videos, for example, you really won't go wrong with either of them. That being said though, with the TCL Stylus, at 6.81 inches versus 6.6 with the A14 5G, the Stylus 5G is a bit larger, and this tends to be a good thing when you're on your phone a lot. In addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 20:9, the TCL Stylus 5G has a really slightly taller and more narrow form factor. Now the difference is definitely not huge, but if you're doing stuff like watching videos in landscape mode, with the TCL Stylus, you are going to get a more immersive experience, and if you're doing something like web browsing, reading, or scrolling through social media, with a taller and more narrow form factor, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. But that being said, these differences in my opinion are pretty subtle. And for that matter, the A14 5G does have a slight advantage too, with the 90Hz refresh rate versus a 60Hz with the TCL Stylus 5G. And this is going to make the movement on the screen a bit faster and smoother, making the A14 5G feel a bit more premium to use. So overall, despite their differences, I feel like either way, if you are looking for a more affordable 5G phone for stuff like watching videos, browsing the web, using social media, and you really want a nice display, you really can't go wrong with either phone. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, we are getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the TCL Stylus 5G, this phone is getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. So between the two, clearly here, the TCL Stylus 5G has quite an advantage, having double the storage of the A14 5G. So if you are more of a heavy user, and you're someone who's constantly downloading stuff like apps, games, things like that, or maybe you just never want to have to worry about space, in general, one way or another, if storage is important to you, I would definitely go with the TCL Stylus 5G. That being said, with the A14 5G, despite 64GB being pretty much a bare minimum in 2023, for the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone, it will be at least acceptable. So if storage isn't really that important to you, the A14 5G is still going to be completely fine. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners right here in the power keys. So definitely nice that we're getting both options. But starting with the A14 5G, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the TCL Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both were real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, both phones do have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. For the camera setups, with the A14 5G, we got a 13-megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50-megapixel main camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera. With the TCL Stylus 5G, this phone also has a 13-megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50-megapixel main camera, a 5-megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera. So overall, both phones do have pretty good camera setups here, but unfortunately, again, the A14 5G only has a macro camera and no ultra-wide camera, whereas with the TCL Stylus 5G, again, this phone does have an ultra-wide camera, so if you do want to get those wider angle photos, definitely keep this in mind. And when it comes to photo quality, I feel like these phones are roughly the same level. To give you an idea of what they can do, here's a picture taken with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G using portrait mode. Definitely a real nice photo. So if you're using this phone for maybe Instagram, for example, where you want really good quality, but you don't necessarily need top of the line $1,000 flagship quality, then in that case, the A14 5G is going to get the job done just fine. Now here's a picture taken with the TCL Stylus 5G, again using portrait mode, and I would say in general, the quality is pretty much about the same. Now obviously this is kind of subjective, and it's debatable which one is better, or maybe you think they're actually equal too, but honestly they are roughly the same level. So overall, for the things most people are usually going to be using their cameras for, either phone is going to get the job done just fine. So considering the photo quality is pretty much equal more or less, I would say the TCL Stylus 5G has the overall advantage here, because again, this phone does have an ultra-wide camera, whereas unfortunately, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, while having a macro camera, doesn't have an ultra-wide camera. But again, if you're just taking regular pictures or maybe using portrait mode, either phone will get the job done just fine. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 1330 processor. With the TCL Stylus 5G, this phone also has 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700. The overall performance is going to be pretty much the same. You're not really going to see a significant difference between the two. too. But that being said, for more basic daily activities like web browsing, social media, and really just the typical things people usually use smartphones for, either phone is going to be perfectly fine. And no matter which one you get, when it comes to performance, you will get a good experience. That being said, if you are more of a heavy user, if you're going to be on your phone all the time, or if you're doing more demanding activities like high performance mobile gaming, for example, in that kind of situation, you are probably going to want to get something a bit higher end, because these phones, while being decently fast for what they are still not going to be that fast. Now, I did run benchmark tests on these phones using Geekbench 5. And here are the scores I got. So as you can see, not really a huge difference. Technically, the TCL Stylus 5G scored a bit higher, but in my experience, again, there's not really a huge difference between the two. So I guess if you want the absolute fastest, then based on this test, the TCL Stylus 5G has a bit of an advantage. But again, I'm telling you, in real life, when you're actually using the phones, the performance is going to be pretty much the same. Now, for the battery, the A14 5G actually has quite a big advantage, with a 5000 mAh battery supporting 15-watt fast charging versus a 4000 mAh battery supporting 18-watt fast charging with the TCL Stylus 5G. So if you want the best battery life between the two, I would definitely go with the A14 5G, because while the Stylus 5G's battery life isn't terrible per se, in my experience, it's really not very good, and the charging speeds, while being decent, are really not that much faster than the A14 5G, if they're even faster at all. But in general, the main significant difference here is definitely the actual battery size, in which case, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G is much better. But maybe you're in a situation where you're always around a charger anyway. In that case, the TCL Stylus 5G is still going to be perfectly fine. But again, if you do care at all about battery life, I would definitely consider going with the A14 5G. When it comes to software, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G does get Android 13, and knowing Samsung software support, you can also expect to get several other major updates for it in the future. On the other hand, the TCL Stylus 5G only has Android 12, and while it is possible that this phone might eventually get Android 13, I wouldn't personally count on it. So if having the latest software is important to you, I would definitely go with the A14 5G. For other features, both phones do have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, luckily that's not going to be a problem with either phone. But one thing the TCL Stylus 5G does have that the A14 5G doesn't is, of course, as the name suggests, a stylus. Now, it's not the best stylus in the world, and honestly, if you really want a phone with a stylus, I would personally go with a Moto G stylus instead. But if you maybe want a stylus to use every now and then for navigating through the phone or taking small handwritten notes and stuff like that, it will get the job done. It's kind of a nice feature to have, considering it's really one of the only options for non-flagship phones that do have styluses, so definitely something to think about. But honestly, if you don't ever use a stylus, then you can just tuck it away and forget it's even there, because with this phone, it's definitely not intrusive. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, for the most part, I feel like these phones are pretty even, but each one does have some advantages. On one hand, with the A14 5G, this phone again has a newer software and much better software support. So if having the latest version of Android is important to you, the A14 5G is definitely going to be a much better choice. It also has a much larger battery. So again, if battery life matters to you, this is definitely something to think about. On the other hand though, the TCL Stylus 5G has a slightly larger display with a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're going to be consuming a lot of content, I feel like you are going to get a slightly better experience with the TCL Stylus 5G. It also has double the storage, a camera setup that actually has an ultra-wide camera, ever so slightly better performance, although I don't really want to count that one. Make of it what you will. I think they're pretty much even, but if you want to get technical, according to the benchmark test, the TCL Stylus 5G was technically a little bit faster, so I will give it that. And then again, this phone does have a stylus too. So overall, to sum it all up, if the camera, display, and storage are more important to you, or maybe you want a stylus, then I would go with the TCL Stylus 5G. But if the battery and software are more important to you, then in that case, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G will be a much better choice. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G and the TCL Stylus 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.